Hi everyone, my name is Kathleen Rao and I'm what's called a psychological wellbeing practitioner at Harrow Talking Therapies. Now what this means is that I work with and support individuals who might be experiencing symptoms of anxiety, depression, panic, stress, just different mental health difficulties. Now in these workshops we're going to be looking at ways to maintain wellbeing. So thinking in particular about managing stress, depression, anxiety, and also sleep, and just spend a little bit of time looking at symptoms of each of these and just spend some time exploring strategies and techniques to manage in more helpful ways in order to maintain well-being. Now, this video today is our final session. And with this, we're going to sort of be bringing the sessions together and introducing some self-care practices that you can try and incorporate in your sort of day-to-day life and future well-being plan. So just to recap, over the course of these workshops, we've covered stress management, understanding depression, sleep management, and understanding anxiety. So in each of these, we gave you just a bit of a brief introduction to what each of these are. So what stress is, depression, anxiety, sleep. And we looked a little bit about how this can affect teachers in particular, and then looked at helpful coping mechanisms for dealing with all of them. Now, with these topics, it's important to know that some of them, they may have related to you more than others. So moving forward, it's really important to think about what key messages you're going to remember from these workshops. Is it to take a bit of time out for yourself? Is it to practice mindfulness during the day? Is it that you need to put some time aside in your day to worry rather than worrying throughout the whole day? Whatever it is, think about how you're going to incorporate it into your day-to-day routine. And really think about, okay, I've got to work, I've got to look after my students, but I also need that time for myself. So bearing in mind the idea of the oxygen mask analogy that we talked about. Also moving forward, it's really, really important to remember to be compassionate to yourself. Some days are going to be harder than others, and that's okay. We're never going to have a life where we're free from anxiety, free from stress, free from depression. It's impossible. So it's okay to have days where this might be worse. Thinking about that, it can be really helpful to think about what might be early warning signs that you're slipping back into possible anxiety, possible depression, or stress. It can be really helpful just to take a bit of time to jot these down and perhaps think about an action plan to put in place if you do recognize some of the symptoms coming up. So think about, okay, if I see X, I will do Y. Now, thinking in relation to that, goals can be really helpful for the future. Goals give us something to focus on and work towards in terms of our own well-being. So it might be helpful to have a think about what you want to achieve in the future in relation to your well-being, bearing in mind it is not selfish to look after yourself. If you are thinking about making goals, it's really important to be specific with your goals. It makes it easier to measure them, to follow them. When we say specific, we say think SMART. So looking at being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time specific. So for example, instead of me just saying, okay, to look after myself, I want to exercise more, I might say, okay, I'm going to do a yoga class at 6 p.m. on every Wednesday. So it's showing me exactly what I want to do, and I can reflect on whether I've achieved it or not. And goals can just be helpful to give us a bit of guidance as to where we want to go. Now, we've given you a whole plethora of techniques throughout these workshops, and it's just about finding what works for you. So what we're going to do in today's workshop, I'm going to hand over to Hugh, who's going to be talking about some more self-care practices that you can incorporate into the additional ones that we've already discussed, and begin to think about how you can incorporate them day to day and how you can continue with any progress that you've made. So I'll hand over to Hugh now, who will discuss this further.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I'm really excited about this workshop. It's something that I'm very passionate about and something that I very much believe in my own personal life. And a lot of these practices I'll incorporate into my own routine. So hopefully some of them will be really helpful for you. Before we do get started, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction about Mosaic, what we do, and also me and my role. So Mosaic LGBT plus Young Persons Trust is an organisation that supports 13 to 19-year-old LGBT plus young persons from across London and also occasionally outside of London as well. You can see our mission down the bottom there. We do our work in a variety of different ways. The core of what we do generally is the youth club, which is part of a social space for those young persons, often who come to us talking about feelings of social isolation or exclusion. So it's about building relationships and a community. And then always in that workshop as well, there's a part where we'll do a little bit of a workshop. And the workshop that I'm about to do today is actually adapted from one of those discussions. So you get like quite a cool insight into how the work actually happens in practice. Whole bunch of things outside of that. We do a lot of work in schools, currently working with the police and some criminal justice professionals on a hate crime project, a few drop-ins, community outreach programs, lots of fun events. And under normal circumstances, we have a culture club program, which is where we take lots of young persons to go and see any sort of queer, intersectional art, museum, gallery, shows, whatever it might be. Really whole-rounded education, I guess. So me, yes. Hello, my name is Hugh. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Assistant Director of Mosaic. We are a 2-person full-time team and a volunteering team of about 12 mentors and also 12 trustees who get very stuck in and support the work that we do. So we're quite a small organisation, but we do support quite a lot of young persons through all these different avenues. I guess it's helpful to say that given the size of the team and the amount of work that the executive director, Luke Ash, and I share, some of these self-care practices are very important for me to be able to compartmentalize the work that I do and look after myself when I'm supporting so many young persons as well. So these practices are very much for you, and this workshop is very much for you, but obviously any of the skills that you learn can be passed on very, very simply. So we are going to be talking about self-care today, and I think a lot of us might start this with quite different ideas of what self-care really means. There's a lot of discussions online about self-care, sometimes some quite negative attitudes to self-care, as though it's some kind of new radical millennial self-indulgent thing. But a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today in terms of self-care are probably things that you're already doing without realizing that they are just a practice of looking after yourself. And when we get into how you're looking after yourself, maybe there's an element there of having a little bit more gratitude or reflecting on what it is that you're already doing. So I picked up this little definition here, and some key bits that I wanted to kind of focus on is, yeah, that thing of narcissism. I see this quite a lot, that very self-indulgent sort of attitude towards self-care of, bubble baths and chocolate dipped in strawberries. And if those are things that make you feel good and help you relax, then that's absolutely wonderful and there's no shame at all. But it can be quite small and quite simple things that we're doing just regularly throughout the day. I really like this analogy as well. So we often talk about self-care as a little bit of a toolkit. I tried to find the queerest toolbox that I could find, and this is the one that I came up with. So it's lovely in bright pink. But yeah, we talk about self-care as a little bit of a toolbox because, excuse me, it's also not necessarily one thing, but it's actually a myriad of different practices or behaviors or rituals that we might have. So depending on whatever the situation is where we need to support ourselves, or whether it's just during like regular times where we're proactively trying to prepare ourselves and build a little bit of resilience, there's a whole bunch of different things that we might go to in our arsenal and try and see perhaps what's working, or if we're in extra need of support, something else that might be in there that's a little bit more of a kind of hardcore tool to support ourselves. So we think about it as a range of different things. I know this has already come up as an analogy, so you may be familiar with this already. And I know that Kathleen did mention this in the introduction, but one of the things that's really, really important when we think about self-care in terms of the why, in terms of the work that we do supporting other young people, of why self-care might be important for us, and how we can shift the stigma and the perception about self-care as being negative or self-indulgent, is about thinking how we're actually preparing ourselves to be supporting other people. I've heard it said so many times that people will say that if we said the things that we said to ourselves to others, we'd be horrified and we wouldn't have any friends. So thinking about how we might be able to speak positively about ourselves and to value the time that we're putting in to look after our own mental health. So of course, it is the oxygen mask analogy, which is if we're not in a position where we feel safe and secure and stable and well, then it's very difficult for us to be able to provide any support to anyone else. So first and foremost, before thinking about the well-being of others, we have to think about the well-being of ourselves. Otherwise, we're simply not able to provide that support, or we're going to face burnout and a lot of other things that I know have been discussed in this series as well. So that's why this is really critical. I also wanted to address another very interesting sort of quirk when thinking about self-care. I know that certain self-care practices can create quite a lot of interest on social media and can be quite a lot of sort of turned into a little bit of a fad and a thing that people think is something of the moment, or is a capitalist tool to get people buying more apps or purchasing journals and all sorts of like other behaviors that might spin off when we think about self-care. And one of them is this. One of them is thinking about self-care as a challenge. And the reason why that's a really troubling thought process to have is because if we're already in a position where we're feeling under pressure from our work, things in our personal lives, whatever it might be, thinking about self-care as a challenge creates it as something else in our mind that is an additional burden on what we need to be doing. So lots of these things in isolation are so fantastic. And again, we'll get into some of them specifically. And I know that like things like sleep have been discussed at great length, but thinking about self-care as a challenge and pushing ourselves too much to try and get all of this into one day is not necessarily going to be helping us resolve the problem or building resilience, but is actually going to be compounding the effect of the stress that we're already feeling. So I don't really like the idea that we're thinking about challenges. We can be setting ourselves targets to be trying to encourage new behaviors, setting rituals and building habits. But at the same time, a challenge is something that's potentially going to set us up for failure and only make us feel worse about not being able to achieve the goal or the challenge that we have set. So a little bit of a mindset shift there as well, just to begin with. You've already seen, like I said from that last slide, that there are lots of ideas and lots of different ways and lots of things in the toolbox. And there's some ideas that I wanted to go through quite specifically. Again, a lot of these, probably most of you will go, oh my God, I already do that. You don't need to tell me. That's totally okay. This is just about thinking about how it is that you're spending time looking after yourself already, and perhaps being a little bit more mindful about that practice and saying like, this is so lovely that I do that for myself. I'm really grateful that I was able to have the time to do it. Starting with something simple like eating well. We all know that this is something that's absolutely a cornerstone piece of positive well-being, resilience and mental health. And again, it's something that a lot of us will already do, but being a little bit more conscious about it and not necessarily changing the behavior, but saying how lovely, I made myself such a good meal today. And that was an act of self-care. Sleep. Side note, also pets are really valuable for, a little bit of a cuddle and a play and a session of relaxation with your favorite fluffy friend. But yeah, sleep, not going to go into this in too much detail. We all know that it's really important, but again, thinking about it more consciously as like, this is something that I'm able to do to support myself. How amazing is that? The next one, this is actually lighting and building a really nice space and creating a really lovely vibe in your home or in your workplace. So thinking about designing a space that is both functional but also supportive of your mental well-being. I think this is so important at home while we've all been in lockdown, is thinking about how we are designing a space that's conscious, like a consciously designed space that is conducive to relaxation, or maybe it's something that is a little bit more conducive to focus when we need it, and also how we transition between those two spaces and those two atmospheres so that we're not confusing the two and work is bleeding into relaxation time and vice versa. I will go into light in a little bit more detail as well. Meditation, this is a really funny one to talk to young persons about, because again, it's one of those things that many people will feel quite a lot of pressure to do and will have lots of ideas about what meditation really means and whether we're doing meditation properly and how frequently we should be meditating. And it can create additional anxiety for people when they're trying to meditate and perhaps unfocused and thinking that it's so much about control of the mind and less about just sort of taking stock of what is happening in the mind today. Just asking your question, like a quick check-in, how am I actually doing today? Maybe that is a moment of meditation for you. I know people who use all sorts of different guides and reminders to get them to be thinking mindfully and to be more conscious of our behavior. Simply like through walking through a door frame and saying, oh, how lovely is this room? Or what's my current mood today? Checking in and having those little reminders. Also, for anyone with any religion or faith practice, meditation is also built into a lot of those structures. And so things like prayers, rosary beads, mantras, all of those sorts of things are about focusing the mind and checking in with the state of the mind. Also practicing gratitude built into a lot of those things as well. So not necessarily a novel thing. And like I say, not something that we necessarily have to feel has a lot of weight or pressure. Probably something that we already do, but perhaps maybe today we're just thinking about how we can expand that meditation or that mindful practice. Reading, this one in my mind, in my heart, is tied very closely to sleep. I'm sure you will have discussed the importance of having a really proper wind down. But at the moment, so many of us are spending so much time staring at screens. So being able to do something that's focusing our attention, that's not looking at a screen, is just an old book. I think not having that light, and also not necessarily just the light of the screen, but also the notifications that demand our attention, can be very intrusive when we're trying to relax. And so good old fashioned books is a thing that I might turn to when I feel like I need to relax or do something to take some time out for myself. Finally, again, this one's so funny because you can just tick this off most likely and say, amazing, I'm self-care queen. Drinking enough water. We'll get into this a little bit more again, particularly in winter, and how people think that the amount of water that we need changes. How frequently do you stop in the middle of the day, go like walk over to the sink, fill up a glass of water and think about how that is again an act of like nourishment or supporting yourself, and saying, oh, you know, how lucky am I to be able to have water freely flowing from a tap that tastes great and is good for me. And then also just again thinking about how much water you're having. If you're working on a desk all day, do you have your water bottle next to you? Do you have a big jug of water? Any of those sorts of things. Again, this one's so nice because you're like, oh, love it. Self-care is a glass of water. It really is. It's part of being healthy and looking after yourself. So it's also an act of self-care. And finally, this one may be a little bit more difficult. And I say that because it's so hard to motivate ourselves to get outside and walk and exercise, particularly when the weather is not so great. But at the same time, I think it's so key that we remember that that makes it all the more vital. People might do things like me and bring nature inside, so big plants or little cacti around the house or whatever you might do, but getting out and exercise is one really key part of this. And the second one, again, being connected with nature. So thinking about how you might be doing something other than your own space that you're in now, and that feeling maybe of confinement, a little bit of a change of scenery, getting out into a park, whatever area you have near you, perhaps even exploring a little bit if you do have the time and the capacity. There's incidental exercise in this, which is really lovely. Also, if you're doing it with someone that you live with or distanced with, you know, a single friend, whatever it might be, there's also value there in socializing and that incidental exercise. Cool. So I touched on a few of these already, and I said that I wanted to go into them a little bit more in some more detail. And that is, what does self-care kind of look like? And maybe how does it change in winter? So as you can probably tell from the accent, I did not grow up in the UK. I grew up in Australia. And there was something really interesting that I noticed just in terms of the trains, which created this quite interesting thought process for me about how people's behavior changes when the weather changes. So where I grew up in Australia, we would often have days when the weather was so hot that they would be concerned about the tracks melting. And so the trains had to go really slow, which is still bizarre to think about. But anyway, conversely, here in the UK, whenever the weather is a bit intense or perhaps there's ice or snow on the tracks, we know that trains also modify their behavior and public transport changes, and people going in and out of their homes changes all the time. It's important also that when we're looking after ourselves, and it's a thing that we already do, but are we conscious of how we support ourselves, perhaps additionally, a little bit more self-care, or perhaps a little bit more consciously. So thinking a little bit more about what we're already doing. So the first one is lighting. Potentially seems really obvious, and I spoke about this before with the image of the candle, but lighting is really key to constructing a space that you feel comfortable in or is conducive to different moods. There's a few different ways that we can do this as well. So as well as obviously the need for us to have vitamin D, is also thinking about what our mood and emotions are like in terms of the space that we have. Perhaps when we're thinking about that vitamin D, it's either getting outside or maximizing the amount of natural light that you can get in your space wherever you are now. So a few different ways to do this and a few different benefits and reasons why this is important. You can ask any architect or interior designer, and obviously this is one of the key things that's a part of their thought process. Also, again, if you're like me and love to furnish your house with plants, thinking about the light in your flat might be something that you're more aware of, but otherwise not so much, but it's still having an impact on you. So it is important to think about. A few different ways that we can do this, a few different ways that we can use light to support our well-being. I had a couple of cool little neat tricks and tips and things that I use over the winter, and some things that I've told a few of my friends, and I get absolutely rave reviews. So hopefully some of them might be useful for you. The first one, natural light, already discussed that. Thinking about sunshine, making sure that you're opening your blinds. Maybe it's even you setting up your workspace near a window so that you do feel more enveloped in that light, which sounds maybe like quite a hippie thing to say, but you know, that sensation of feeling the warmth on your skin and not just noticing the light, but feeling it in other senses as well can be quite a powerful reminder of that connectedness with the outside and that beautiful, warm, lovely feeling. If perhaps there is less natural light or we're not feeling that it's having such a significant impact on us, there's a few quite little clever things that we can do. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a bit techie. I quite like gadgets and gizmos. Gadgets and gizmos are plenty. Lots of different like sort of tech tips and things that I would use. But my absolute bread and butter is a couple of smart lights. You can actually pick up quite a few brands of smart lights that are quite cheap. They're basically just globes that fit in normal sockets, but connect to like my phone or Wi-Fi or whatever I'm doing. And I can control and adjust them, which is so important. So when I was talking before about the difference between a space that's conducive to working and a space that's conducive to relaxation, for me, is entirely down to the light. So the difference between quite a cool blue light, which maybe is more energizing or more of like a light that would wake me up, helps me not doze off and feel sleepy and concentrate on what I need to do. At the end of the day, when I'm finished and I put my work laptop away, I turn my smart lights down and I tell them that it's super nerdy. I actually like have a thing that says relax. I turn that on, they go warmer, they go dimmer, and it's a psychological indicator to me that it's relaxation time, you know, work is over, and it's like a space that feels more comfortable and cozy, and like safe and cocoony and protected and all these kind of things. So like a dimmer switch, perfect, like absolutely great. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. Also, you could achieve the same effect by lighting lots of different candles, all sorts of different things. I just really like the lights because I'm able to adjust it. And if I like doing things on my phone, then I feel, you know, a bit nerdy. So yeah, lots of different ways to do it. But that for me is an absolute, like, it's the core of it for me. Also thinking about not just the lighting in the evening, but also the lighting throughout the day. So having multiple points of lighting, or lighting a candle even in the morning and burning throughout the day, to give you that warm, cozy sensation. I also started doing something quite clever. So if you have any screen as well in your room or living room or in your house, a TV or a laptop or whatever it might be, there's lots and lots of videos on YouTube that will have like a 10-hour recording of a fire burning. And so to create also that nice relaxing sensation, if you don't have a fireplace, it actually does have quite a big impact to put on one of these videos and to leave it on the screen and leave your laptop there or whatever. Maybe it's like your Friday night treat and you think you're getting cozy in bed or relaxing with a glass of wine or whatever you're doing, and feeling that lovely, cozy, warm feeling, and how you can kind of recreate it in different ways. This one, again, discussed a little bit, but exercising, we know, so crucial. This one is simply, how are we exercising in winter? When the motivation is less, but perhaps the need is even greater. Again, lockdown, not getting incidental exercise, lots of us not getting that morning walk on our commute or whatever we might be doing. So how are we thinking about also supporting our mental well-being and our physical well-being through a little bit of exercise? This one, my manager is really amazing at texting me and saying, hey, weather's lovely, we're not meeting this morning. Like, I'm not having a call with you. We can have our weekly catch up tomorrow. The weather is lovely. Go outside, like maximize it. Perhaps not everyone is that fortunate, but it's thinking about shifting your working day. Like, is this an email that I can get done, or is this something that I can get done later in the day when I know that it's going to be raining this afternoon? Because right now, stunning, need to go outside, need to go and get a little walk, just to go outside, like breath of fresh air. You don't have to be running marathons all the time, but how are you going outside? Again, keep up connecting with nature. Obviously keep your distance. Dressing for the weather, this is fairly obvious to you probably, but for someone who grew up in Australia, not so much. I'll still regularly try and leave the house and my flatmate yell at me and tell me that I'm going to absolutely freeze. Which seems strange because my Scottish mother always used to tell me that there is no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothes. But it's a lesson I'm still learning, so stick with me. But hopefully it's one that you know already, or can pick up a little quicker than I. So yeah, how can you feel comfortable and cozy just by the clothes that you're wearing, and thinking about what activity you might be doing? Seems like a no-brainer. The next one, mixing it up. So lots of people started the lockdown and started doing like amazing 30-day yoga challenges, or decided that this was the time that they were going to train to do the London Marathon, or whatever it might be. All those things fantastic, and working towards a sense of achievement of having done something continuously and very regularly, and saying like, oh, I can put a badge or a medal on that. That was great, I did it. But also thinking about if there is an aspect or an element of monotony in your day, mixing up the exercise as well. So maybe it's not the same route that you take, or maybe you decide to watch a different series of yoga videos, and perhaps trying different styles just to create a little bit of excitement and variation, I think, is really valuable as well. So if the weather's not so good, how can you somehow make it exciting by doing something a bit different? Taking a podcast with you, or listening to an audiobook, or something that you might be able to do at the same time. I definitely would recommend also just trying to connect, and go without a phone, not have any of those notifications. But also, if you have some other way that you really like relaxing through a book or podcast, then absolutely combine the two. Yeah, HeadsUp menu, also a big part of that. Next one, I'm just going to touch on sleep a little bit, just because there are some things in winter that will potentially be a bit different. The young persons at Mosaic have a very recurring joke that you can't say that you're tired to me, because they know that they'll get essentially a lecture. My partner once described me as someone who sees sleep as a holy thing. For me, it's spiritual. It's such a part of, it's such a key part of how I'm able to look after myself. And yeah, I almost do have quite a strange, religious way of thinking about sleep, but I'm into it. It works for me. This has been a thing for me for such a long time. I need my 8 hours. I know that I need them to be the same 8 hours. We know about social jet lag and some of those things that hopefully have been discussed before. I know very well what works for me, whether I'm a nighttime person or a morning person or whatever you might be, whether you're someone who naps or doesn't nap, all those things, totally fine, very normal, natural variations. The important thing is just to know yourself, to know what it is that works for you, what your needs are, and where you're able to sort of shift things if you have to, and what works for you, basically. But in winter, we might find that perhaps that changes. So we can know ourselves very well, but there are external factors that are outside of our control. Whether it is lockdown, or whether it is shorter days, or change of seasons, or whatever it might be, there's also likely to be variation throughout the year, and listen to that. Like I said, in terms of the challenges all the way at the beginning, none of this is about shaming anyone for what it is that you're experiencing, or how any of those things have changed, and saying, oh, I'm not getting enough. There's lots of recommendations about how many hours people should be getting, but at the end of the day, what's your should? What's your range that feels normal for you? People can do things like keeping sleep journals, or tracking sleep, or lots of different things to try and understand what that is. But when you know it, is it helpful for you as a guide, and can it encourage you to stick to those things? We know that, animals hibernate in winter, and I believe that it's very possible that some humans might do that a bit as well. And so not just sleep, but also thinking about meal times. And like I was saying with water before, hydration. Remember, if you feel thirsty, you're already a bit dehydrated. And often I think there's this misconception that in winter we need to drink less water. Not the case. Obviously, if we're sweating, then probably we'll need to drink a little bit more. But don't forget that lots of homes that are very well heated and insulated can often be quite dry, with radiators and lots of things. So we probably still needing the same amount of water as well. But for the other two, sleep and meal times, think listening to your body. Regularity is definitely good, but not being resistant to any kind of change or variation, because variation is just as natural as that regular stability. I've touched on this quite a few times as well, thinking about what does self-care look like in exceptional circumstances. And this feels like one of those emails that says, I hope this finds you well in the middle of a pandemic. But yeah, no brainer. These are exceptional circumstances. What does self-care look like? Very interesting question. And I actually, it would be great if you could tell me, because the answer for many people will be really different. For some of us, when the circumstances are exceptional, it might be that so much is going on that this goes out the window. we're finding it really hard to find the time or to find the motivation or to find the support or any of those things. And it's really difficult for us to be able to practice self-care. For some people, it might be that the challenges are so much that we go head first and we go like, I know that this is going to be even more of a challenge for me. And so I need to be doing additional work to build up that resistance. I don't want to say additional work, additional preparation to sort of like build up that resilience and to think about how that might impact me in future. So a bit of a proactive rather than reactive thinking. In all aspects of self-care and in all of these things that we discuss, I think the most important rule is to always do your best. Whatever it is that you are or are not able to achieve in a day is absolutely fantastic. If you got out of bed that day and you made your bed, self-care, you've made your room nice and you've done something that makes you feel good and makes it a little bit productive. If that's what you're able to achieve, that's amazing. We're not going to be doing 30-day yoga challenges and baking banana bread for the rest of our lives. Unfeasible, unrealistic, and like adding too much pressure. So if it's one or two things that you're able to focus on, that's absolutely fantastic. But if you also are a person that knows that like this presents particular challenges for you, maybe it is thinking about asking a friend to keep you accountable to do some of these self-care things, because even though they're difficult and you're not feeling the motivation, you'd like a little bit of support because you think that now is the time where they're most important. Really crucial one. I started talking about support just then, and I don't really think that any of these self-care practices need to be done alone, which sounds like a really weird thing to say because self-care is by definition you doing something for yourself. It's reflexive or whatever if we wanted to get into the grammar of it. But it's you looking after yourself, which sounds weird that there would be other people involved in that. But just like when we go back to the toolbox, or if you've ever done any kind of like mental health first aid training, you know that what's in that toolbox is not just things and practices and behavior and habits. It's also people. It's like you hearing from someone else that they're having a particularly challenging day. Or perhaps it's someone saying that they've been watching an amazing show or reading a really amazing book that's been very inspiring for them and has taught them a lot about self-care. Doesn't even need to be conversations about self-care, but at the same time, being social and connecting with other people is also an act of self-care as well. So when we do that, and I mentioned as well accountability. So at Mosaic, we run lots of sessions throughout the week. I run a meditation on a Monday afternoon, and then also a gratitude journaling session on Friday afternoon. So sometimes maybe to build that habit, you want someone to guide you through it, or to keep you accountable and ask how you're getting on, or to give you tips or whatever it is. So having someone as well building in those practices for you yourself can also be very beneficial. And you've been staring at the statistic for a while now. We know that as a result of COVID and the lockdown, lots more people are experiencing loneliness, are feeling disconnected from friends and family, and not even that, just not seeing people, not being surrounded by people like on the bus or in their workplaces or all sorts of different things. So thinking about what we're experiencing and how the stress or challenges are being compounded, perhaps for you, loneliness is a result of that. Perhaps for you, loneliness is the cause of a lot of that. But at the same time, it's a thing that a lot of us will be feeling. So in this age of Zoom calls and messenger chats and Snapchat conversations, if anyone's still doing that, there's a lot of like the sensation of connectedness without the actual feeling of connectedness, and it feels like a tick box exercise of, oh, I checked in with that person because I liked their post on Instagram. Not the same as actually having a human connection and being aware of the impact of that disconnect on us. this is a tough one because for a lot of us, it's not something that we can change, because if we could, then we would have already changed it. But this one is about, I think, being kind to ourselves and understanding how the impact of all of those stresses that we might face at work or in our personal lives are compounded by the lack of support. So this one is just a note of like, hey, you're going through it. A lot of people are. That doesn't mean that what you're experiencing is any less or any worse, but it's a feeling that's shared by a lot of people at the moment. So kindness to the self, so important. I think on that, I started getting into a bit of my anti-social media rant about the illusion of connectedness. I experienced this so much because of having many of my friends that I grew up with and a lot of my family in Australia. And so sometimes it feels like these little 10-second text conversations that I might have with people are as though I am catching up with them. But it's really not the same. And so I'm not trying to say that any of those sort of feeds or text chats or whatever are not effective. They absolutely are. But also at the same time, I'd love to encourage you to actually make the time to connect with those people. And it's not going to be a face-to-face conversation, but it's going to be picking up the phone and having a call with them instead of a big group chat like quiz. I don't know if anyone else is very Zoom quizzed out at this point. Instead of those big group environments where we try and feel like it's very exciting, we have to be using the latest tech or watching a video together or whatever we might be doing, go back to the old ones. Just pick up the phone and call someone. No distractions, no face filters, no games, nothing like that. And just say, how are you doing? Supporting other people is a really fantastic way of feeling rewarded and valued and all sorts of different things. So not just about supporting them, but also looking after yourself. And obviously we know that relationships, two-way street, so getting that support in return. I also heard lots of young persons talking about going really old school and writing letters or writing postcards and other mediums of having connection. Writing a letter, going to the shop to buy, a stamp and an envelope, posting it, waiting days to receive it, requires more thought process than picking up your phone and sending a voice memo to someone. It requires conscious thinking about you and that person and your relationship. And that's what the act of planning to go and hang out with someone also feels like. That's what a lot of these things do. And so you're more likely to get that sensation of connectedness without, a funny, silly faced filter photo. Those things are still really valuable, but also just make sure that you're properly connecting in other more tangible ways as well. And finally, getting into social media as well, I think this one is probably the easiest. So at the end of every workshop at Mosaic, we will always do something that's like a takeaway. That's like, what's one thing that you can actually just go and do now with what I've told you? So there's a lot of information there. We normally have a little breakout activity in the middle as well. But it always finishes with this takeaway of okay, now I know this, what do I do right now? What's in my sphere of control that I can just affect change? Because a lot of things I've talked about, things that we don't have control over. And it's not about feeling fed up or feeling overwhelmed. It's just saying okay, some things I can, some things I can't control. I acknowledge that. That's the way it is. Cool. This is something that you can do. At a time when there's this global crisis, it can feel like we are overwhelmed with sad stories, challenges, scary statistics, interesting responses from governments, all sorts of different things. And it can feel like a lot of that doesn't make the situation that we're in better, but actually compounds some of the fears and anxieties that we might already be feeling. So the thing that I would encourage you to do when we're all spending so much time already on social media is to actually think about curating the content that you're consuming. That sounds like it should be trademarked. There's a lot of C's in there, Dr. Seuss. So actually thinking about what it is that I'm feeding into my brain all the time. What am I scrolling past? How many of those things that I see do I have any control over or any impact on, or are they just making me nervous uncomfortable, a bit scared. They're not adding any value to my life. They're only things that are increasing some of the negative thoughts and negative perceptions that I might have. Unfollow those things. If they're not helpful because they're not changing your behavior in a positive and constructive way, don't consume them. If there's really important news that you need to know, trust me, it will get to you eventually. But not having a breaking news notification on your phone doesn't mean that you're going to miss out on anything important. Instead, some of these things may not feel like breaking news and new and impactful kind of conversations, but there's 3 accounts here that I just wanted to recommend, and many, many more that you can find online that see themselves as like a good news movement or a happy, feel good movement. That like virtual hug of just like, oh my dog, oh my dog, oh my God, that dog is so cute. Like, love it, quick smile. It's the same consumption of content in the other way of like quickly noticing it and moving on, but it's a positive thought that enters your head, no matter how big or how small. So if you can start changing some of those messages that are going into your head, less negative, more positive. Like, if the content's meaningless, why not make it cute dogs and cats? Like, if it's just to scroll and fill a news feed with like happy stories of resilience or positive little quotes, or even some of those you might see as mantras. We talked about meditation before. Affirmations, things that you can like focus on for the day, intentions, all sorts of different things. There's lots and lots of ways that you can do it. And these are some really fantastic reminders. So there's lots of things on there. A couple of these Instagrams also particularly focus on sharing tips, sharing experiences that people have had with different self-care practices, combating some of those negative aspects, including challenges that we discussed before, and setting yourself up for failure and having high expectations, like that additional feeling of burnout, and also help us combat the idea that we need to buy something or download an app or like contribute to some kind of like money making to be able to practice self-care, because it's really not the case. And the chances are, if there are already things in your life, including pen and paper, that you're able to use to journal and think about your feelings, that are really not necessary to buy something additional. So these are really lovely reminders. Hopefully there's not a lot in there that's new today, because I didn't want people to feel like they're drinking from the fire hydrant, writing down so many ideas of, oh my God, that's new, I need to do that. Oh, add that to my 30-day challenge, set a reminder on my phone that I need to do that also. I think shifting the perspective to say that self-care is something that we already do, but be more conscious of it and be more grateful for what it is that we're already doing to look after ourselves, can stop us feeling like it's more work, but is just something that we already do. I really hope this is helpful. I'm going to go back all the way to the slides just where I put my email, just in case anyone wanted to get in contact or had any questions. Or the other thing that I would say as well is I love hearing from people about what is helpful for them and what's not helpful. So please do drop me a line and let me know how you go. Thanks.